Hello, everybody. My name is Terri O'Fallon, and in this presentation, we will be sharing some information about the STAGES model and the research that we have done. But first, I'd like to give you just a little bit of background about how the STAGES model came about. STAGES was theoretically inspired by the intersection of the Ken Wilber's Aqua model and Soren Breyer's STAR. I also was very familiar with Aurobindo's developmental model, which intersected spiritually with the highest vertical developmental scale that I knew of. Then I became quite interested in the famous linguist Charles S. Peirce. And then, of course, the Loevinger ego developmental lineage was primary for me. I had learned how to score in that lineage and had a great deal of respect for that. As I worked with all these models, I was struck with an intuition that all of these beautiful models could be interwoven into something that would include all of them, but yet still create something quite new. So with that little introduction, I'd like to share my screen and start sharing some of the research that we have been doing to support this STAGES model through the years. So this will be a summary of the research on the STAGES developmental model, and Tom Murray and I are going to do this together today. We have some published papers. We have, first one is one that we did for the Elsevier journal Helion, and it was our replication study. The second set of research projects that we did are included in 18 articles in the Integral Review special issue on the STAGES model. But I'd like to share just a few little insights about the STAGES matrix itself. The STAGES matrix has repeating patterns in it, which make it exceedingly interesting when it comes to learning about one's developmental level. And we work with 3 different questions. The first question is the object of awareness concrete, subtle, or meta-aware? And you can see that these are expressed in the tiers. The second question is the experience come from an individual kind of a learning, I want to learn it by myself, or a collective preference for learning, I want to learn with other people or through other people, or in reciprocity with other people. And you can see that this also replicates through the tiers. And then the question 3 is the experience receptive, active, reciprocal, or interpenetrative? This is the engine of development right here. And of course, these patterns repeat through the 3 tiers. When you look at them from this process, you can see a replication, but also when you go across, you can also see that. So let's take, for example, these person perspectives going all the way from 1.0 through 6.5. You will see, we'll just do the 1.0 stage. The description of the first person, this early first person perspective, is concrete, individual, receptive. When you put it in the subtle tier, it's subtle, individual, receptive. When you put it in the meta-aware tier, it's meta-aware, individual, receptive. So with that, you can see the repeating patterns that we use and that we are able to score with and able to determine the developmental levels of the perspectives that people take. We have about 10 different research studies that we want to share today, and you can see all of them here. There are many, many of them, and of course this means that we're going to have to do a fire hose presentation. I'll pass this off to Tom here.
Thanks, Terri, and hi, everyone. Yeah, I just want to add here that our goal is mostly to make the point that a lot has been done in just the last couple of years in terms of the studies and publications that are out to validate STAGES model. And we only have a short time here, and we're going to give a fire hose presentation that just briefly mentions each of these studies. And we refer you to the published papers that have all the details. And we have purposely shrunk the tables and figures and the details of each of these studies to be almost unreadably small in these slides. The first and last slides have a link to the full PowerPoint presentation. and that will have full-sized figures and more details. And also, we want to schedule an informal Zoom call in a week or so and invite anyone who wants to come for more extended questions and discussions. And we'll put that up at the last slide.
The first study that we did was the stages versus the MAP replication study. The question that we had to respond to is stages assessment method measuring the same construct as the MAP? This is Suzanne Cook-Reuter's inventory, up through the strategist level. That means up through the first tier and the second tier. We had excellent results on this first study, match using Cohen's kappa in the highest category that they have in the Cohen's kappa. And the second study was dealt with the MetaWare tier. Since there wasn't enough stages in the MAP later level scoring, we ended up doing a iterator reliability on that, and that also was validated at a very respectable level.
So say a little more here about inter-rater reliability. Inter-rater reliability tends to be quite good amongst all the people using the sentence completion test at the level of the total score that aggregates over the 36 items. But we wanted to go a level deeper and look at the reliability at the level of the item, which is more difficult to show. So we did this for the most recently trained cohort of stages scorers. There were 5 scorers there, and we did find that even at the item level, there was a very good inter-rater reliability amongst them.
We've also done some longitudinal studies, 2 types of studies that I'd like to remark about. And the results were very clear about the capacity for people to move from one developmental level to the other. This is important because when we get to the MetaWare tier, we don't have a replicability study for any developmental model that goes that late.
Longitudinal data showing that the measured stage almost always increases or stays the same and rarely decreases is one of the primary psychometric indicators that a construct is indeed developmental. And we were able to show this trend clearly, even at the MetaWare tier, the most novel and uncertain set of stage descriptions in this new model. So one of our colleagues who is doing a peer review of the longitudinal study we just mentioned had a very good question. They were concerned that there might be something about the scoring procedure in stages that allows people to score in the MetaWare tier, that's 5.0 and above, just by displaying a kind of esoteric spiritual language. In other words, they were concerned about whether people who could score in the MetaWare tier and kind of bypass the strategist 4.5 type of complexity. So we actually looked at the data and we were able to show that in the MetaWare tier 5.0, 5.5, 6.0, there were plenty sufficient number of those complex 4.5 completions in those inventories. So not to get too far into the weeds here, but we wanted to look at rationalysis, which is a more modern validation method within the item response theory family that is used by many of our colleagues in adult development, but is not been used in the Levenger tradition. And we ran the stages data set through rationalysis, and the results are all in detail in the papers, but basically the test looks quite strong under Roche analysis. And we were able to show that the levels in stages model are evenly spaced. And that's important because the stages model inserts and it creates new levels over and above and also in between some of the levels of earlier Levenger tradition models. And looking at the even spaceness of these stages from one to another. And this shows that the model correctly describes the evenly spaced stages of this aspect of adult development. So in the process of doing this Roche analysis, we brought in a number of experts in psychometric analysis and item response theory. And almost universally, or actually universally, they identified a number of issues with the Ogive cutoff method that's used traditionally in the Levenger tradition. So, so we devised a new way of aggregating over those 36 stems that doesn't have the drawbacks that the cutoff method does. List some of the benefits here. And one of them is that in the traditional method, there's a conflation between shadow crash scores and truly lower levels of cognitive complexity, so that if you have a lot of shadow crash responses, you might be given a low score, even if you demonstrate that you have a much higher level of meaning-making complexity. So our method does not confuse those shadow crashes with actually having a lower meaning-making complexity. And that's one of the things that allows us to study children.
I want to say a few things about the specialty inventories here. Stages, because of its scoring approach and the use of structures underneath the scoring approach, allows for the very easy creation of new stems and topic-focused inventories, which can be supported by a Cronbach's alpha, so that we have good validation on these results. So what we did was take the general inventory, we took a certain number of stems out and replaced them with special stems. This allowed us to have a test within a test. And you can see the areas that we have here that have been validated: education, love, climate change, dementia, hope, business, leadership, children, relationships, money, psychology, that we can get a good idea of how people take perspectives on these different specialty areas. One of the specialty inventories was the Children's Developmental Research Project. These were kids ages 4 to 13, which we did with the Brisbane Independent School in Australia. There were 53 children. It's the first recent study of its kind to study ego development in children. Levenger had some studies on girls, but it was our intention in doing this research study to extend the normal developmental levels from birth all the way up to the highest level that we could find. We took 11 stems out of the adult developmental general inventory and replaced it with those 11 new stems that related more to children. And we gave this test orally. We ended up, if the children take the whole scale orally, we ended up with an acceptable internal validity. And we have a full analysis that are in progress related to the qualitative aspects of what we're finding in these responses that these children made to us.
We're also looking at how the use of particular words and concepts evolves over developmental growth. And even though the stages model uses more of an analysis of underlying language structure than looking at particular words or concepts or phrases, we're still very interested in how these concepts evolve in development. And we also do use an analysis of vocabulary, sometimes in the scoring method when there's uncertainty at the very end, in terms of things being on a borderline between one level and another. So one of the concerns here is that the use of words does evolve over time as culture evolves. And so we are going to be doing this kind of vocabulary analysis on a regular basis every few years and comparing and fine-tuning our thematic analysis and our scoring procedure. And you can see here that we're finding very interesting patterns in this data. Different words have very different patterns, and they often fit what we would expect them to look like from the stages model.
We've had the good fortune of having many good PhD research projects that have used the stages model, and you can see a list of some of them here. And also master's thesis projects and other applications, which you can see here. And so all in all, we are just so grateful that we've had an opportunity to do this much research, showing from a variety of different research lens that this is it appears to be a model that is a valid and successful model. And we're just delighted to see you all here today and to share this information and research with you. What's next, Tom?
So to learn more, you can go to stagesinternational.com, and also we'll be putting these slides up with a bunch of extra slides with details at this URL, which we'll paste into the chat during the Q&A on the Zoom call today. And we'd also like to have a follow-up conversation next week at about the same time. So if you're interested in that, send me an email. And if there is interest, we'll set that up. Thanks a lot, everybody.
End of fire hose presentation. Thank you so much, everybody.